All right, and we're live. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this webinar about empathy to unite a divided world. It's so great to be here with you all. My name is Jeff Utecht. I'm here in Seattle, Washington, and I'm going to have the rest of the crew introduce themselves. We'll start from my left to my right on the screen. So it's going to go Chrissy, Emily, and Kim. So Chrissy, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Chrissy Hellyer, and I am here from Perth, Australia. And I'm just getting a little bit of feedback, so I didn't mean to make it quite quiet just then. So I'm delighted to be here.
Hi, I'm Emily Roth, coming to you from St. Louis, Missouri. I'm an independent contractor, but I am very excited to be the author of this course, Teaching Empathy to Unite a Divided World.
Awesome. It'll be great to get to hear you. And Kim from Bangkok.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kim Cofino. I live in Bangkok, Thailand, and I am super excited to be here and talk to you guys about this amazing series of courses that Emily has designed for us. And we've been sharing over Facebook Live and on our website for the last 8 weeks. So I'm super excited to kind of consolidate all of that thinking into one awesome webinar.
Very cool. All right, so we're going to get started here, and we've kind of got some ideas for what we're going to be talking about. So I'm just going to throw those up here on the screen real quick. The first thing we're going to talk about is the idea of kind of what course one is in this mini series, which is fake news and the responsibility to be a digital literate. And the question we're going to be discussing is, what does it mean to be digital literate? Now, I find this really interesting because I got a tweet today from somebody who was saying, are we considering empathy to be a 21st century skill, like a learning skill, or should it be categorized differently? Thoughts? Oh, wow, that was good. So here's what I'm thinking.
It wasn't our question. It wasn't the question we were all prepared to answer, so it's taking us in a different route.
Well, what does it mean to be digital literate? We'll start with that.
No, I think we can talk about your question. I think it's really interesting. I don't know that you would, and it's the same with a lot of the 21st century literacy skills, right? If we're using that phrase, a lot of those skills I would say aren't specific to our current time period. They're all skills we would have wanted to teach kids and have been teaching kids all along. Maybe what's new and different now, and maybe not like just today, but in recent years, is the access to so many different ideas, so many different kinds of people, so many different cultural perceptions, so many different perspectives, that empathy maybe has a more important role now because we have such quick and easy access to people who think differently than us, not only to hear what they have to say, but also to respond, and often in a forum that does not immediately make you feel empathetic, if that makes any sense at all. What I'm talking about is, writing a comment on a YouTube video, you don't have the immediate reaction of seeing somebody's face and seeing how they feel about what you're saying. So being able to be empathetic to what's being shared and being able to be empathetic in your response maybe is more critical today than it was in the past, even though it's something we would have always taught.
And something that's interesting, I remember reading an article just within the past couple of years when they were talking about jobs and what kind, companies like Google and Facebook and all these really big successful companies, what is the number one skill that they are looking for in employers? And that is empathy. And I just thought that was really interesting in terms of how are we preparing our students to be ready for their future, and how are we teaching that empathy? And even more specifically within the last year, I think the reason why I wrote this course is just there's so much hate and division going on in our world right now. And when having empathy is what connects us. And when we feel connected, then we call ourselves to act. And so to really unite this divided world, to really do something, I really feel that kind of the foundation, the roots of action are having empathy and knowing how to, as Kim said, knowing how to connect with people.
It's
Yes,
such
and I think that.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, and I think that especially today, we've always done a really good job as teachers in the classroom, in our own classroom, in our own four walls, of building a positive classroom culture. And now that we have this access to technology, as Kim said earlier, we have these tools that we can now leverage the walls coming down in our classroom. And so we kind of forget that our students, they are really good at doing something in one context. So they're really good at being good to each other inside the classroom. But then when we move to another context, the skill's not transferable. And I think that that's why teaching empathy throughout everything that we do, and like Jessica says in the chat, working towards skill with empathy as an attitude means that it's a transferable skill. So I think that, to me, that's what it means to be digitally literate. I always have trouble with those two words.
Well, so I'm just wondering, like, does it mean digitally literate? Or when we're talking about empathy, isn't empathy more of a behavior in the way you act? And do we need to be teaching? Because we talk about attitudes in class all the time with kids, right? Like, that's one of the things, and be nice to your neighbor, talk nice to people, don't say nothing bad, that nothing. Are we transferring those behaviors that we have always taught to a new digital world? And so when we talk about being digital literate, is empathy part of the behavior that goes with being digital literate?
I think there's so much more beyond the behavior. There's also, like, the search skills that we looked at in weeks 3 and 4, when we talked about, like, how do you determine what's going on in the world, or what you're hearing is going on in the world is true or not. So I think that it's twofold for me. It's there's skill and there's attitude.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Chrissy. When I think about digital literacy, I don't think about empathy specifically or the behaviors and attitudes that come with it. I think more along the lines like what you're talking about, the skills. And in this first course, the course we're kind of referencing as we're talking about this now, one of the key themes is understanding fake news and how to be critically literate about what you see online, how you understand what's true from what's fiction, how you fact check all of that kind of stuff, how you understand what a website is trying to tell you or sell you. And then empathy is a behavior that we want kids to have when they're interacting in those spaces. But I don't think it's a digitally literate skill or digital literacy. I don't think it goes specifically under there. That's why I think we were all like caught off guard when Jeff asked the question, because I think it's kind of two slightly different things. Digital literacy to me is a lot of skills based. And maybe we have the attitudes within that, but to me, it's more a skills-based thing.
Cool. All right. Any others, or shall we move on?
I just want to highlight Jessica's point, which I really appreciate. She says, it makes me think about responsibility. I teach my students that being responsible is doing the right thing, even when no one is watching. I think that's the same with empathy. And like that is just nails it for me. And when Chrissy was talking before about the need for empathy to transfer among different spaces or between different spaces, I think that's like exactly what Jessica is talking about, and exactly the skill that we're trying to cultivate in this course and all the materials that we've provided and all of the learning that happens through this 3 course series that Emily has written. Sorry, I was in the chat. I'll admit it, I didn't hear the question. I was responding to someone in the chat. So I don't know if Chrissy and Emily have a thought on that, or Jeff wants to ask the question again, because I always have a thought.
So we're moving on to our next
I love
question.
She's so honest.
And so
Awesome.
it's just, I was asking about how can we empower students to be resilient citizens who communicate effectively both in the digital and physical world? And I was talking about how, when we have students set up a blog, they're going to get spam comments. And how do we help them deal with that, or even negative comments, whether that be on your Instagram feed or when we're talking about building resiliency, what does that mean and what does that look like?
Yeah, I think you raise a really good point, Jeff, because I think sometimes we get so concerned in making the classroom a safe space, which I believe it should be, that we don't want to expose students to potential negative interactions. Like you just mentioned, Jeff, on a blog post, you might get a spam comment. Well, you will get a spam comment, right? So sometimes teachers are like, I don't want my kids to blog, or I don't want to use a class Twitter account, or I don't want to allow them to comment on YouTube videos because they're going to see the negative side of what happens in those spaces. But actually, it's the same kind of concept of like, you teach a kid to swim in a shallower pool, and as they get older, the pool gets bigger and bigger and bigger, because we have to be exposed to those, potentially uncomfortable experiences so that we can learn how to deal with them. So it's like, driving tests before you give the kids the keys to the car, swimmies before you let the kids jump in the pool. It's not that we want kids to have bad experiences, but we want them to understand what is out there and how you as an individual can respond, because that's really all that you're in control of.
And to be honest, when Kim, when you just mentioned that, I remember working at a school where I was working with fifth graders, and they know how to, just as middle schoolers know how to test and push those boundaries of what they can, when they're on their devices, what they should be looking at and doing and all of that. And whenever something happened in terms of them making a poor choice, I was always secretly kind of celebrating on the inside, because I knew that was a phenomenal learning opportunity for them. And I was so thrilled that it was happening for them when they were 11, and hopefully that they learned their lesson, and that it wasn't happening when they were 18 or later on when the stakes are much higher. So really taking those opportunities as learning opportunities, as we know that failure is so important, what is it? First attempt in learning.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Emily, you raise a really good point, because if we don't explicitly teach them how to not only make the negative comments, but also how to respond when they receive negative comments themselves, then there's that potential later on for them to have that happen when they're a lot older. And of course, then dealing with that can be a lot harder.
And one of the things that Jessica raises is they're definitely going to experience negativity online, sometimes to the point of traumatic comments or images or experiences. And I think that's a really good point, because if we aren't bringing these conversations into our classroom, we're almost kind of willfully ignoring the reality of what it means to be a person in online spaces today. And we know that so right now we're kind of talking about arbitrary negative comments, like something negative you might see on YouTube or a spam comment on your blog post. But I think one of the things that I know that I see is kids behaving, the way kids behave, maybe sometimes not nicely to each other in online spaces where their school community is interacting. And they're having those interactions, they're having those experiences entirely on their own, unless we're bringing an understanding of what that behavior means into our classroom, and helping parents, which is a whole nother avenue of conversation, understand how to support their children in online spaces, because they're going through the teenage years face-to-face and online. And we would never want to leave them alone in that experience in a face-to-face setting. So exactly that same way, we don't want to leave them alone in that online setting.
I was just going to touch on that too. Sorry, Jeff. Kim, when you talked about parents, and with Eduro, a lot of our work has to do with talking with parents too, and as you said, and talking to them about how important it is to have the open communication and really building that relationship with your child. And I think it's the same for teachers in the classroom. The relationships are so critical for really true deep learning to happen in the classroom. I know we get, we have to get through the curriculum and whatnot, but we know that if we really want kids to come and truly learn in our classrooms, those relationships need to be there. They need to see that we're a person that they can trust and come to us if they have those, traumatic comments and things, because they may not have that with their parents.
And that gets into a whole nother interesting conversation, which we're actually going to talk a lot about in the coming weeks on our Facebook Lives and in our blog posts and stuff, is how do you help parents understand all of this stuff? Because oftentimes for parents, the classroom teacher is kind of the first point of entry in understanding how to help our child manage their digital lives. And so as a teacher, sometimes you feel this extra burden of doing that kind of that side of the education as well.
So I think about, my wife's a school counselor, and I think, in a lot of her sessions when we talk about, because part of the prompt is in both the physical and the physical and the digital world. And when we talk about building resilience in the physical world, I know she does lessons around, especially with the younger kids, the idea of talk, walk, squawk. That there's a system in place that we teach kids that if you do get into a trouble or somebody is being mean, that there's kind of this talk, walk, squawk, or whatever it happens to be, kind of method that we give kids to be able to help themselves and find help when they need it. What are some ideas that you might have around how we help having that same type of idea with students in a digital sense?
I feel like it would be like exactly the same, except maybe instead of the walk, it's like close the lid or put down the device, right? Like it's the same kind of concept. Is if something's upsetting you, talk to someone about what's going on. And maybe there's opportunities depending on maturity level of directly talking to the other person, or maybe you need to go to a, mature adults in your life to help you kind of, go through that. And I think that someone has mentioned, Mrs. Matt Gist has mentioned building a family type relationship and a trusting environment. And I think that you can do within your classroom. You have 100% control of how your classroom environment is set up so that students will feel empowered and safe in talking to you as a teacher. And then beyond that, building that culture within the school too is another kind of, especially if you're in kind of a technology leadership role, another thing that can be a real priority, a real focus, so that kids feel comfortable going to the counselor and saying, this conversation happened on my Facebook stream, or this conversation happened in my Snapchat or my Instagram. Help me. How do I deal with this?
Yeah. And I was just thinking as you were saying that, I wonder, because I agree, I think, the big takeaway here is a lot of the things that we already teach kids in the physical world actually work in the digital world. We just have to be explicit. So I'm thinking it's just as you were saying that, I was like, we teach kids to talk, walk, squawk. I wonder if it's talk, block, squawk. That might be,
could be.
Huh? I just came up with that. That would be kind of cool.
Yeah.
Talk to somebody, block them, and then tell them. I mean, that would work, right? It's the same type of idea. But again, I think a lot of these things that we already teach kids in the physical world do carry over. We just have to explicitly teach them, how does that relate to you in a digital world, for sure.
And I think one of the things in the Facebook Live that I did on this topic, one of the things that can be really valuable is a lot of opportunities to role model this experience. And you can do it in, real scenarios that kids bring in from, with no names attached from their personal lives, or made up scenarios where you're actually going through what would you say in this situation? Because sometimes it's really hard to know in the moment what to say. And the more practice you have at it's a skill, right? It's a skill to be diplomatic in your conversation. It's a skill to not immediately get your back up. It's a skill to try and figure out, what is this person really trying to say? Is it coming across wrong because it's in written form versus them saying it to me face to face? Those are all skills that we need to help kids develop.
I even think, along with that, just thinking about that. Sorry, Chrissy. How many times have we all gotten an email or we've gotten something where you don't respond right away? right? Like you go, you talk to somebody else, you let it sit for 24 hours, you bounce the idea off of a friend or a spouse or a partner, and you talk it through with a teaching partner, and then you respond to the parent, or then you respond. To me, that's just another one of those things that we do, I think, as adults. And how do we help kids understand that you don't have to respond right away? I know the pressure is there to respond right away, but you don't have to. You can let it sit until you're ready and you're in a space that you're not just throwing back the wrong emoticon, and then you're really in trouble.
Mrs. Matt just asks any practical suggestions. And I think the one suggestion I was trying to share just now, maybe we can brainstorm some others, is role play, like actually going through the experience, even being handed a laminated card with an Instagram photo and comments underneath it, and have a conversation. You're this person, how do you interact, is like just one thing that immediately in the top of my mind. That's a super practical suggestion, really open-ended. If you wanted to, you could actually have kids bring those ideas in from their personal lives and say, no names attached to this, but here are some examples of what might happen in your digital life.
Yeah, and I would only add to that. Sorry, Chrissy.
Poor Chrissy, she's trying so hard. She's so polite.
Chrissy, go ahead, and then I'll add to what I was going to say to Kim's.
Well, I was forever the teacher. You're thinking about the conversation and thinking about, now what could I do in class that's relevant with my students? And the other day I watched the New Zealand police read mean tweets, and I thought, what a cool thing to do in high school class, especially when, the students are a bit older and they don't sort of like doing the kind of things that elementary students do. So that made me think we could have a mean tweet session where we laughed and relaxed, but then also got into a deep discussion about, what did that person mean when they said that, and how did the person feel that received it? So that was my cool idea for a practical way that you could bring that conversation into your classroom with high school students.
And doesn't Jimmy Kimmel do that all the time? I feel like I see that all the time. So that's a super relatable, easy way to bring that in. Yeah.
I was just going to add on to Kim's. I love the idea of the role play and having kids bring in their own conversations and whatnot. But I think, and Kim did mention it briefly when she said about Instagram, but I think one thing to make sure that you are doing is talking about apps that your students are using, and how respectful communication looks in those. Because when I think about respectful, when I was writing Respectfully Disagreeing, what I was thinking about was my Facebook posts, and when my uncle writes back, posts something under something that I've written that I don't agree with, and how am I going to react to that? But especially kids in high school aren't on Facebook. So using examples that are real to them, if you are going to role play for them, talking about Instagram, Snapchat, YouTube. And so that might require the teacher to have a better understanding of the way that those various social media apps work. And so, but that's okay, because Google is there and you can get a quick 60-second kind of overview of what those apps do. Or also ask your students. They love to teach their teachers about what they're doing in social media. So,
yeah, I think that's a good segue too into our next question, which is all about like breaking down the walls of your classroom to build bridges. And around the question that we had, the prompt we had is, why is the skill of empathy so critical in the world today? And if we want to build those bridges for our classroom, it's so interesting, I think, because, I think more than anything, what I hear is, well, technology breaks down the walls of the classroom, and then very few times do we actually then do that. Actually get kids outside the walls of our classroom, even though everybody totes that as like, that's the big thing technology does. So what that skill of empathy critical in a world today in building those bridges? And how do we do that?
I think we talked a lot about that in the first part, like that first question you asked us, Jeff kind of got into that conversation a lot. But I think bringing it back to this class, this particular course that Emily wrote for us, she talks a lot about having global collaborations, having kids connect with other students in other parts of the world where they are producing products together, communicating on a regular basis, sharing on a regular basis, kind of getting to know other people in other places. And that, to me, that's that idea of breaking down classroom walls, is that your classroom isn't limited by the physical structure that you have. Technology enables us to create, share, collaborate, connect, communicate, all those great things with other students around the curriculum that we're really trying to help our students understand.
Yes, and I would just say this was my favorite one to write, because this is something that I'm super passionate about, and really connecting, like I said, your kids to this global community. And now it is so incredibly easy to do and free. I mean, just the amazing opportunities we can give our students. And one of the questions that when I go talk about this in professional learning sessions, people are like, well, how do I do it? How do I get connected? And lucky enough, there are several platforms out there that make it really easy to connect. One of my favorite ones is Google's, one of their communities called Connected Classroom. Maybe Kim can put it in the chat for us. And when you have, so if, okay, so you have, that's through Google Plus, and if you have a Gmail account, you just connect through Google Plus there and go to communities, and you search Connected Classroom, and you'll see there's I think currently there's about 25,000 members, and they're from teachers all over the world who are looking to get connected with another class. And when we think about another thing that teachers would say to me is, oh, well, I have all this curriculum to get through, that kind of thing. And basically, you can take whatever you are doing, and then there's all these soft skills that you are expected to teach and get through with your classes. So this is an avenue to be able to do that. So I've had teachers or myself when I was in the classroom where, we're studying geometry and this other class is studying geometry, so let's connect. And it's not like you're connecting every single day. It could be a one-off thing, or it could be something that you do. I know a really fun thing is to do a mystery hangout or a mystery Skype call where you get to guess where the other class is somewhere in the world, and the kids have a ball. They can only ask yes or no questions to find where the other class is. So they start to learn about, for example, they might ask, are you north of the equator? Are you east of the prime meridian? So all this rich vocabulary that they're excited to learn because they're seeing this other class and figuring out where they are. I would oftentimes use that as my initial handshake, kind of getting to know this other class. And then throughout the year, and we had on one of my classroom doors, we had a world map. And then once we met a class, we would print out their class photo and use some yarn and put the class and pin it to wherever that was, in Thailand or Chicago or wherever it was. And then throughout the year, because my kids were fourth graders that year, and they had their own blogs. And so when they needed comments, then we had, several classrooms where they could go and get feedback from other kids. Or another thing we did is we did a shared Google Doc, and we said, okay, what are our top, because our kids, we were looking for a recommendation for a read aloud. We had just finished ours. And so between 4 classes from literally all over the world, Korea, Thailand, Chicago, and India, we said, okay, vote on your top 10 read alouds. And the coolest thing for my students was to be able to say, oh my gosh, they're reading the same thing we are. Piece once again about empathy and being able to connect with people and seeing these similarities and allowing those similarities to really bring us together. So Connected Classroom, like I said, is a great one. You can search by, okay, I'm looking for another grade 9 through 12 class or an early ed class, or I want something for language arts. So you can really get in there and people are posting literally by the hour. Or you could, if you're on Twitter, you could just follow a hashtag like #GlobalEd or something like that. But the way to get connected, to connect your class is to first get connected yourself.
And that's exactly what I was going to say is like, it's so much easier if you have built your own personal learning network, because then you have those personal connections with other people. You actually know them. You have like this avenue to communicate with them. I mean, I think of the first way that I met Chrissy was through a global collaborative project. And then we ended up working in the same country together. And now we own a company together. Like, it's really amazing how far your personal learning network can take you. And it takes a little investment in the beginning to kind of make an effort to build that digital space for yourself, but it pays off so much in the long run.
I think the other thing to remember too, and this might be for like middle school, high school students, but many of our kids, without even thinking about it, have global connections. Whether it is, they have friends on Instagram or in Snapchat that just don't live or go to their school, and they might not be global in the sense of international, but probably global within their country. And how often do we even have kids stop and just reflect on that they are already pretty connected, and even look at, you go through your Instagram feed and where are the people you follow or people that follow you? Where are they from? I mean, I think there's a lot of connections that kids bring to our classroom, especially in those later middle school into high school years, that I don't know if we take advantage of. I love everything that you've said, like the master Skype and Skype and author, and those things are great, I think, for like, elementary focused things. But by the time you get to middle school, high school, not saying you can't use those in middle school, high school, but I think students bring a lot of connections that maybe we don't tap into, or even have them reflect on, like, you're doing a paper on X, Y, and Z. Do you have somebody in your network that happens to live there, has been there, has visited there, might have pictures to borrow that you can do an interview with, but we just don't think of them in a context like that, which I think is just another way to be thinking about expanding those walls.
And to kind of build on that, it's a thought that I haven't fully thought through, but Jeff, you really just made me think about this. I watch a lot of YouTube videos, and I really feel a relationship with some of the people that I watch. And I know that sounds crazy to people who don't watch YouTube videos. Like, if I said that to my mom, she'd be like, what is wrong with you? But there are certain YouTubers that I just follow, and I know that if I had a question to ask them, they have their Snapchat channel, they have their Instagram channel, they have the comments in their actual YouTube, and they actually respond to those comments. So like, maybe that's not the kind of deep connection that we're talking about when we're talking about building a personal learning network, but I love the idea of leveraging the existing connections, even to people you are inspired by, or who you feel like are, for lack of a better word, like a star in their area. You can actually kind of tear down a wall there by just leaving a comment and seeing what they respond back to you too. And that is an amazing potential that we like literally never had, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
I just have to share one quick story about a fifth grader. They were doing, no, it wasn't a read aloud. I think that all the kids were reading their own books, and they were, doing reports or whatever on it. Well, one of the girls came to me, and she knew that I had my Twitter account, and she asked me if I could tweet out her, because she wrote this blog post as a response to this book, and she asked if I could tweet the link to her blog post and tag the author. So I did, and the next day, the little girl came to class, and there was a comment from the author of the book on her blog. It was so amazing. And you think about, when kids are writing book reports and doing all these things, are they going to ever remember that? Is that like making a huge impact on their life? No. Do you think that little girl is ever going to forget that the author of the book that she was reading actually wrote to her, used her name? I mean, it was, and then of course all the other kids wanted
powerful.
To do it too.
Yeah. Very cool.
I think in high school and middle school too, that you can now explicitly require in their citing of resources that they have now spoken to or connected to someone who is outside of their classroom, outside of their city, outside of their country maybe. And so really make it something explicit that those older students need to do. So kind of like forcing them to take advantage of the connections that like Jeff said, they probably don't even realize that they have.
Yeah. Yeah. So we've got about 10 minutes left here. And I thought we would, as we start wrapping this up, maybe just go down the line and think about, what's maybe your favorite course out of the 3 in these series. So, we have fake news and the responsibility to be a digital literate is course 1, respectful disagree as a resilient citizen is course 2, and then breaking down classroom walls to build bridges is course 3, all under the series of teaching empathy to united, divided world. So I just I thought I just ask each one of you, what's kind of maybe your favorite of these 3? We've all created a lot of PDFs around this that you can now download and purchase. We've all done, Facebook Live videos around this. Emily, you wrote all of this. What's maybe like the one thing that like excites you most out of this? And Chrissy, I'm going to make you go first because you're the farthest away.
I was just going to say, Jeff, this is kind of like making me decide between my 3 kids, which is my favorite kid.
And I feel exactly the same. I mean, gosh, I know these 3 courses inside out and backwards and sideways now. So they're all really, really good. There's lots of ideas. There's lots of strategies. There's lots of readings. There's lots of really cool suggestions of things that you can do with your students, be they elementary, middle, or high. But I don't know, there's something about globally collaborating. And so for me, the breaking down the walls of the classroom, I've kind of always wanted my classroom to have a window into it. So that 3rd one, breaking down classroom walls to build bridges, if anything, it nudges slightly ahead.
I like it. Good. All right, Kim, you're second farthest away.
For me, okay, so I'm the same. They're all awesome. And I know how much work has been put into these courses and all of these resources. And I highly encourage everyone to check them all out because we are so excited about all of them. But I guess I am a little bit wrapped up in kind of the current state of the United States and kind of what's going on with understanding media literacy and critical literacy. So for me, the first course, the fake news and the responsibility to be digitally literate, is the one that's like on my radar right now, because I think there's so many skills in there that we think a lot about doing good research. We think a lot about evaluating our sources. We think a lot about getting kids to look at more than just one source. But I think this concept of like intentionally misleading people, I think it's like new enough that we don't have a ton of strategies for that yet. So I think that course is really packed with lots of ideas and strategies for how to handle this kind of new dynamic that's just emerged in the last couple of years, maybe even more at the forefront of our attention because of the current political situation in the U.S.
All right, Emily, I'm going to make you choose between your 3 children here.
Okay, and I'm going to, just as if you asked between my 3 kids, I'm going to say, I have to say something good about each one of them really quickly. So the fake news, I love that there are some links to some examples of lessons K through 12. So if you're looking for a starting place, then that's really helpful. Also, another thing that I really like about all 3 of them, I've made sure to align them to the ISTE standards so that it's not like, like I was saying before, it's not like you're doing something extra. There's actually can be a tie into the ISTE standards, which can then tie into the Common Core standards. The respectfully disagreeing, I think that one is so right now, just with the state of our world right now, and really building that resilience in our children. And there are some great video resources there, as well as in all 3 of the courses, I have interviewed teachers from the States and from overseas. And so the one on teaching digital, or the resiliency one, disagreeing one, is a counselor coming from Malaysia, and she does a phenomenal job. And then, of course, the breaking down walls, I already kind of said before, but that I think all of us here on this call here, we're all Jeff, Chrissy, and Kim and I. We all met globally, and I think that's where all of our hearts kind of lie with this global passion. But the reason why I love this course too is because I've really tried to put in some practical examples of some real projects going on. For example, one I can think of right now is the Traveling Rhino project, which is a really cool one that I've done with elementary students. So just some real examples, as well as ways that you can get connected and how do you dive in. So those are my 3 kids.
Well, I won't make you pick, because you did do a ton of work in creating these for us. We really appreciate it. It's funny because I think for me right now, the one that's probably the most on mine, and of course, it comes from, again, I mentioned that my wife's a school counselor, but we've been talking a lot about this idea of resilient citizens and building resiliency in kids. And being a counselor, she sees this a lot, both in the physical and the digital world. And how do we help kids understand, how to deal with things that are said both physically and digitally, and overcome those and pick yourself back up and know that it's not the end of the world. And, I think the thing that I really like about the course, and something that I'm still playing with, is not every time somebody calls you a name means you're being bullied. It just means they're a bad person, and we have to be very careful about this idea of being online bullied, much like you're bullied in the real life. Like, there's some resilience, and I'm not saying you should go out and call people names, but there are just jerks in the world. And sometimes you just have to know they're there and how to overcome those, and how do you pick yourself back up. So I think if I had to choose between the 3, the fake news stuff and all the search skills, of course, like that's my bread and butter. But I really like this idea of building resilient citizens. And I think the earlier we can start building some of that in, the better off we're going to be as we move forward, for sure. So, all right. In the chat, I am quickly trying to get in all of the freebies. So if you're watching, you can get all of these freebies, which will be free for a little while longer.
The rest of today.
For the rest of today.
Yep.
So
Which time
today.
zone? Which time zone? I'm going to bed soon.
Okay, today and tomorrow. Yeah, we seem to be having some trouble with the links, Mrs. Matjes. I think if you just put HTTP // in front, for some reason the live chat on YouTube today is not liking us putting links in.
Yeah, if
now we know. We even learn. Next time we'll know that we actually organize all of our jobs out, and turns out we can't do any of the jobs that we organize. So now we know.
We're learning,
but we are resilient, and we are learning.
We are resilient. That's right. And thank you for going through that technical trouble with us. We are so glad you made it back to us here in this new hangout. I think that was just another example of being comfortable with the technological challenges.
Well, I think it just shows,
and being resilient.
As much as behind the scenes we were all like freaking out, panicking, you have to deal with it. I mean, it's tech, and sometimes even Hangouts goes down and there's not much you can do about it, but we did persevere. We were resilient and we made it back. And
we had a nice little chat in the meanwhile. So
yeah,
that's awesome.
Oh, how cool to translate them into Polish. Yeah. That would be awesome.
Writing and saying it was awesome. And please, like when you've done that, if you wouldn't mind sharing it back with us, we would love that.
And obviously give you credit. Awesome. Yeah, that would be awesome. And if you guys have any suggestions for what you would love to see from us, or what you're interested in finding more about, what would really help you, we really want to produce things that are useful for you. We're so passionate about all of these topics, and we just sometimes don't know where to focus our energy. What would be the best resource, or the best series, or the best class, or the best whatever? Please let us know. You can email us. You can leave a comment on our blog. You can respond to us on Twitter, on Instagram, whatever format works for you. We would really appreciate your feedback on what you would like to see from us, because we're just super excited to be sharing all this stuff. It's obviously our passion.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Well, that's going to wrap it up for this webinar. Thanks everybody for hanging in there with us again over the technical difficulties, and hopefully this hopefully it was worth your time to come and hang out with us and listen to us go a little bit deeper into these courses. So once again, Chrissy Hellyer is now is a New Zealander located in Perth, Australia, coming to us from her office
not
there.
for much longer.
Not for much longer. She's on their way back to New Zealand. Emily Roth is coming to us from St. Louis. So thank you, Emily, for joining us tonight. And she's also the author of these courses. And Kim Cofino is coming to us from Bangkok, Thailand, where it's early morning for her and Chrissy. So they're just starting their day while you can see that Emily and I both have our lights on as we're saying goodbye here in the States. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. We really appreciate it. And keep following us at eduralearning.com. Take a look at the courses. And we'll be back with more newsletters if you sign up for the newsletter so you can catch the next webinar. See ya.